Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Arna Sahu, host of Arna's News, where on this podcast channel, I aim to eliminate the gender gap in the STEM fields by featuring inspiring female professionals and highlighting their stories and accomplishments to further encourage girls. Today on episode 35.
So, as we mentioned before, you need to be prepared for, prepared to engage in lifelong learning. And it's something you should enjoy because it really is interesting to keep yourself current and to learn new things. And it's incredibly critical because of the pace of change. You'll be obsolete if you don't. But it's also, as I said, it's interesting. I would always recommend that people, as much as possible, challenge themselves by moving into emerging areas. As I said, if you get comfortable in an area and stay there, you're going to get left behind. But it's also challenging and interesting to move into emerging areas because that way you stay on top of the technology, you stay on top of the field, and you have more opportunities because advancement is quicker in new areas.
Today on episode 35, I am pleased to announce our guest, Paulette Altmaier. As a part of the board of directors for the Concord Consortium, business mentor of the Business Rhythm GSBI Miller Center Social Entrepreneur Program at Santa Clara University, an EdTech mentor at GSV Labs, and also an advisory board member of Pragya Systems. She is a high-tech executive who has had full scope responsibility for acquired companies in the engineering, marketing, and sales services. With a focus on technology innovation for market leadership, revenue, and market share growth, she has helped with general management of $1.5 billion businesses. So thank you so much, Paulette, for being here today. Before we dive into the questions, would you like to introduce yourself?
No, not at all, Aruna. I think you did a pretty good job. Thanks for the intro. And I'm glad to be here to do my bit to interest young people in STEM careers.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. And okay, so my first question for you is, tell us a bit about your career path.
Well, I'm an immigrant to the US. I did my undergraduate degree in electronics in India at IIT Madras. And then I came to the US to do my MS in computer science, which, strange to say, was so new at the time that there were actually, I'm not aware of any undergraduate programs, certainly in India, and there were very few over here. There were mainly graduate programs. So I started my working life as a software engineer at Intel, and I moved up the engineering management ladder to be VP of engineering. But at that point, I was very interested in business management of product development, with the full P&L. So I became responsible when I moved to Cisco for, as you noted, a $1.5 billion business at Cisco. Now I've left the career track, but I definitely want to keep using my skills to help others. So I'm focused on education technology now, and also mentoring startups and mentoring social enterprises, some of whom are not at all technology focused.
That's impressive. Thank you so much for sharing this. I like how, although you climbed the engineering management ladder, as you said before, you still fostered your passion of wanting to help others, and you basically moved your career path to focusing on helping people.
It's very rewarding.
And what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours? Do you have any tips to succeed?
Well, I would say one thing is don't let social pressure dissuade you. I think the situation is much better now than it was when I was starting. I went to IIT in 73, graduated in 78, so that's an awfully long time ago. And at that time, girls simply didn't go into engineering very much. My class had, 2 women in a graduating class, so more than 200. But anyway, as I said, don't let social pressures dissuade you from the career you want to or you're interested in. Let's put it that way. And when you're on the job, and this may apply in college as well, though I think less so, something that's often hard for women to do is to promote their accomplishments. So people, your management, not just your immediate manager, but at least one more level above, is aware of what you're doing, because otherwise you'll be overlooked, and worse still, someone else will take credit for your work, which sadly still happens. So of course you have to work hard, do well, but then make sure that other people know what it is you're doing. And women often have a very hard time, promoting themselves. But unfortunately, it's just reality is that you have to do it. You also, if there's something, if you want to change, you also have to be a bit of a squeaky wheel. If you want something, you really need to be consistent about asking for it, and persisting and insisting. For instance, just to give you an example, when I wanted to move from engineering into business management, the company I was at, the CEO told me, if you don't have an MBA, we really don't think you can succeed in business management. Now, when I say business management, I'm talking about product, managing a P&L for product development. So it was, engineering, product management, product marketing, working with customer support, but so a very technical job still, but required business skills. But the CEO of the company I was at simply didn't believe in that, and I finally had to change jobs to a company which happened to be Cisco, which had a track record of moving engineers. But even there, into business, but even there, when I joined, I had to, while interviewing, I said, I really, I get that you're going to put me in engineering first, but I really want to be in business management. So, and then I did get the opportunity, frankly, 6 months later. But it's really important to keep advocating for yourself, for what you want. You may not get it immediately. There are times when you have to decide it's not going to happen here. It has to be somewhere else. But you've got to be willing, of course, to prepare yourself. For instance, I took short executive education courses in business management. So I wasn't just coming at it with only an engineering background. So of course you have to prepare yourself, but then you also have to insist on getting the opportunity or finding a place that will give it to you. And the last thing I'll stress is, if you're a woman, I know this is not, you focus somewhat on girls, but not only, but I would say, if you're a woman, is don't think of yourself as a woman in STEM. Just think of yourself as a STEM professional. I find all too many women think of themselves as, oh, I'm a woman in STEM, and therefore I'm different, or I'm isolated. It's not a helpful view. It's very self-limiting. So I would strongly advise everyone to just say, I'm a STEM professional, just like everybody else around me, and I'm going to do what you need to do to be successful in STEM, or whatever you to do.
Yeah, staying consistent and advocating for your needs, because a lot of the time when you're climbing the career ladder, your needs are often like limited and you're thrown under the bus. But just being consistent and wanting to go further with your passion is pretty important as well. And my next question for you is, what is a common myth about your profession that you want to debunk?
Well, there are two big ones, which I take every opportunity possible to debunk. One of them is, if you major in STEM, that you're going to be wearing a white coat and working by yourself in a lab and doing research. And I know many young people, including my own two daughters, are not terribly attracted to this path, at least at the beginning, although one of them is kind of doing very, innovative R&D work now. But still, a lot of people, especially girls, tend to not be attracted to this vision. They often say, I want to work with people. I want to be, in a more social sort of career. And I'm sorry to say that colleges, their STEM information sessions also push this very limited view of what a STEM career is. And so many young people think that that's what it is, but it's completely false. With a STEM degree, of course you can be in a technical path, but there are all sorts of other career paths open to you that have nothing to do with research. You can be in sales, where you'll be talking to people all day. But many high-tech companies want people with a technical background because you have to be learning constantly in tech. Tech moves very quickly, it develops, things change. What you learned in college, 5 years later, a lot of it, is not relevant, but that ability, that background, which lets you learn and understand and pick things up quickly on the technical side is very important. So, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's customer support, these are just a few. And those are very people-centric career paths. And I would also say that even if you stay on the pure technical side, as I was for the first half of my career, STEM careers require a lot of engagement with others, a lot of teamwork, a lot of discussion, a lot of collaboration. So, the sort of scientist in the white coat, working by themselves in the lab is a huge misconception. And I think it's really keeps girls away from STEM, and that's a great pity. So, I hope that's one thing. If there's one message I would like people to hear, it's that. Now, there's a second big myth, which also tends to dissuade young people in general from STEM, which is this silly statement that the STEM fields are not creative, but art and drama and fashion design are creative, and that's honestly, it's just plain silly. But you hear it everywhere. So, I mean, STEM is an incredibly creative field. I mean, look at the phone you carry around with you. Even 30 years ago, that would have been seen as pure magic. And just think how amazing it is that we have the world, literally in the palm of our hand. And it's, they're beautiful things, they do wonderful things for us. Or even just look at some of the applications. Farmers in India today can, when they're going to sell their crops to market, they used to be at the mercy of the middleman when they arrived, after going long distances, they, whatever price the middleman wanted to give them, that's all they'd get. Well, now, before they ever leave home, they can, check who's going to give me the best price, and that's where they sell it, and then they go deliver it. So, I mean, if you think about the impact on human welfare, which is something else that young people are very focused on. Technology and STEM careers are incredibly creative. Of course, then there's medicine, there's clean water. I mean, honestly, what's more wonderful than clean water for people? Running water, energy, power, solar power. I mean, honestly, I think STEM is, when you think of the human impact, and when you think of, how hard it can be and how creative you have to be to bring these basic things that people can afford and which really improve their lives, there's very little that's more creative than that. And certainly, designing a dress doesn't come close.
Yeah, I can definitely add on to that, because a lot of people are dissuaded from STEM because they have humanities degrees, or they're just they don't have like the experience of STEM. But a lot of famous people and influencers, although they have humanities degrees or backgrounds, they are still able to get into STEM because they want to do that. And I feel like that's a really important thing to know, because you don't have to have the technical background to get into STEM. There's so many ways to get into this field because it's ever evolving. And also, this field is super creative because it's just not technical, all brainy. There's so many other beautiful aspects to it, and that's really important to know.
But I guess what I also add, though, is that developing technology itself is incredibly creative. So I guess I would just say that culturally we've been fed a very superficial view of what creativity is. So I hope that as people think about it more, as young people especially, that they realize that there's just, so many amazing, interesting things to do. I'd also say you made the comment that, you don't have to have a STEM degree to get into STEM careers. That's true, but it's much easier if you do, much harder, frankly, if you don't. So, so I think it's important to, when you're in high school, to take those core courses, which will allow you to, get enough of a technical background that you can then, be considered a strong candidate for a STEM career.
Yeah. And although if you don't have one, there's still a chance that you might get into the field.
It's not a lifelong decision, but it just makes it a little harder and more roundabout.
Yeah. And if you could step into my shoes or your younger self, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't?
Well, I don't know that anything comes to top of mind on that one. A lot of the, generic advice you hear is good advice. The one thing I would say, you mentioned following your passion, and that tends to be, a lot of colleges will give, will recite that line to students in their, to would-be students or to candidates in the information sessions. But the one thing I would emphasize for young people is you have to certainly you should follow your interests, you should follow your aptitudes, but you also need to be practical about, where can I, where are the growth areas, where can I make a living, where can I be independent, because being practical is important. One thing I told one of my daughters was really into sports photography, and she was very good. She was hired as a freelancer when she was in high school, and made a fair amount of money in the course of her high school years. But she was also very good in her academics and in STEM. And when she was trying to decide what to take in college, we told her, the press is a declining business, as it were, because just a few of the big media companies are going to survive, and your local press is dying. And she could see that herself. The Mercury News, for instance, was laying off people. A lot of the local papers were laying off people. Now they print the same things in multiple papers. So we told her, it's great to have this wonderful interest of yours, you're very good at it, but you should keep it as a hobby. And a hobby doesn't mean that you're dabbling in it. People are amazingly good at things that are not their profession. You can see if you can do it as a sideline, if you remain interested in it, and then if things blossom, then maybe that'll be your career. But recognize it's not a practical career for you to, not something to major in college, because that's just not, it's going to be a very difficult way to make a living. But she's very good in STEM. In fact, now she's working at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and she enjoys her work a lot. And she was in startups in Silicon Valley before. But she's in, her major was in chemical engineering. So she's working in clean tech, in batteries and so on. People need to recognize that there's something they really love to do. It doesn't have to be your profession. You can be extremely good at it without making an impractical career choice.
Yeah, I think that although you have a lot of interests that you like, such as your daughter with doing a lot of press, it's okay if you don't follow that passion, like as your job, as your career.
For your career, yeah.
Yeah.
But you can do amazing things on the side, and many people have done so.
Yeah, and being proactive and practical in what you want to do in your professional life, but also not saying no to your personal life. So keeping that balance is really important to remember.
Mhm.
And what are the best resources / books that have helped you find your career path?
Well, resources have really evolved over time. So the things I used, working through my career, would not be what I would recommend now, simply because there's so much more available, and it's on the internet, and it's evolving. So I would really recommend, though, that people take the time to look things up, because there are a lot of amazing resources that are free on the internet, to look things up, learn about lines of work they're interested in, learn about, even fields that they might be interested in. There's just, at all levels, not just for experts, there's all sorts of information available to inform yourself. And that'll be very important even in the course of your career. Things change very quickly. And you have to be, not just be prepared to be a lifelong learner, you need to want to be a lifelong learner. And that's honestly a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but most people, don't really live it up. You hear it a lot in school, but it really matters. But it's also what keeps your brain active and fresh, and it keeps you current. So I would really recommend that people do that, and learn on the job all the time. You learn about new technologies, you learn about new fields, you learn about new applications. And that applies, by the way, whether you're in STEM or not in STEM. Every field changes, and you'd better keep up if you want to, remain at the top of your personal best, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, technology is an example that I'm going to talk about right now, like ChatGPT, AI, artificial intelligence. That's like a huge thing that's been introduced to people. Like as a student myself, I've been playing around with it, and I think it's pretty fascinating. So being on top of what's happening, because technology especially is ever evolving, that can help you get a bigger edge in your professional life as well.
And it tells you about new careers. For instance, data science as a career didn't exist, frankly, even 10 years ago. And now it's huge. So So it's good for you. It keeps you current, it keeps you fresh, but it also helps you, move into emerging areas. And very often emerging areas are where the fastest growth is and where the quickest opportunities for career advancement are. So, it's important not to, once you get into a field, not to just get comfortable there, because you can be quite sure you'll be obsolete in 10 years. You've got to keep challenging yourself, learning new things and moving into new areas.
Yes. And what do you think is the vital factor that shaped your career path? What was your life before learning it, and what was your life after learning it?
Well, as I say, we were just talking about, passions versus aptitudes and interest. And I would say that, I didn't really, growing up in India, right, at least at that time, I don't know what it's like now, there were no internships. We were really not, had no experience in the world of work. Going to IIT, of course, with 2 women and, a few hundred men in my graduating class was, it's a little bit of an isolating experience. So I had no idea what the world of work was going to be like. But, you get in there and you learn on the job and you work hard. And, I would say also family support is very important, to start with your parents. My father wanted me to be a doctor, but once I decided, no, it's an engineer that I want to be, I'm not going to sit for the medical school exams. I'm going to sit for the IIT exam. He was very supportive. So was my mom, of course. And of course, assuming one gets married, having a supportive husband or supportive spouse is really important. And most women nowadays do want to keep working after they have children. So the other thing I would say, though, is be prepared to be flexible. I had no idea how things would evolve when I started work. But, I had never imagined that I'd be interested in moving into business. But as I worked, for about 10 years, I really got interested in the business side. And so what I would say is, just keep learning on the job, get interested in other areas. You may or may not want to move into them, but you'll be a better employee in whichever field you are if you have a broader view of the business and a broader view of what your organization is trying to accomplish. And the other thing I would say is, some people know from, the time they're 10 years old, this is what I want to be. And, that's what they spend their whole life doing. But in general, I would say, don't make up your mind as a teenager and then, never deviate from that path. That works for a few people. But in general, I would say, work hard at whatever it is you currently want to do, but be open to, the other things you might be interested in, which you have a path towards. I'm not saying if you're an engineer, suddenly decide you want to be an actress tomorrow, but just to use this, my example, I was in engineering, developing product, but then I moved into business management where I was responsible for engineering and other things as well. So I was bringing expertise but I'd also, learned about the other areas a bit. But, some people have moved into, many of my classmates who were in mechanical engineering moved into the computer industry. So I would just say, be aware of what's going on. And that was a very good move for them because, that was the exploding industry. So I would just say, be aware of what's going on, and try to move into emerging, fast-growing fields, because that's really where as I said before, the most rapid advancement is.
Yeah, what you just said before resonated with me because my dad, he's a software guy, and I would always tag along with him in his meetings whenever I'd school off, and I actually thought that was the most boring thing ever. And I promised that I would never step into the computer industry, and I wanted to be a businesswoman. But when quarantine hit, I was a really stubborn person, but when quarantine hit, I decided to do an hour of code, and then I was really interested in JavaScript and web development, all of that. And I kind of strayed away from the business path, but just having that openness to wanting to learn is something that really helped me with my journey to STEM.
And, for instance, Google, just to give you an example, they want all their product managers, those are the people who talk to customers and, decide what product features should be and then work with engineers to they're not managers. Well, product manager is really somebody who needs to know both the customer and the engineering side of a product. Google requires their product managers to be engineers. So they and it's a wonderful. I personally think that's kind of it's a really fun job because you get both sides of it, both the technical, but as I said, you have to have a really deep technical background. You're not going to find an English major. Maybe you will if you look really hard, but Google's not going to have, in general, non-technical people doing that kind of job. So I would say be open, exactly. Be open and, be open to learning. And even if you stay on your original plan, you'll have enriched both your own skill set as well as your, knowledge base if you keep.
And since we have some additional time, my first question for you is, what's one thing you wish you had known when you began your career path?
Well, as I said a minute before, pretty much everything about the work environment. You've had that opportunity, sort of go take your daughter to work day type of thing. Although I will say, if you don't know the topic at hand, you're going to find meetings boring. But when you're in the meeting, it's actually something that you know something about, and so it's important to make decisions, and so it's. But I can see that for an onlooker, a meeting is incredibly boring. So I would say I pretty much knew nothing about the work environment. I think, girls in the US especially are much more, probably in India as well, I just don't know, probably get a little bit better sense of that. And I would encourage girls to do that, to take some of those opportunities to get exposed a little bit, even if, you don't necessarily know what's going on, but also to talk to, your parents, to talk to your parents' friends. My daughter, my elder daughter, not the one who's working in clean tech, at one point she thought she would be a lawyer, and she went and talked to a lawyer who dissuaded her. So it's good to talk to people in various professions, and in the one you're interested in. But you mentioned that you thought you wouldn't be interested in tech. Well, my husband's also an engineer. My daughters, when they were growing up, I have two girls, they both thought that two engineers was kind of too many in the family, and they weren't going to add to that. Well, my elder daughter did biotech in college, and and she ended up as an engineer, and my younger daughter ended up as an engineer, and they enjoy their jobs. Although speaking of different career paths, my elder daughter is in national security, where she is, using her technical background in a national security setting. So, there are just many different career paths, and people shouldn't have fixed ideas about what they can do with their background.
Yeah, it's okay to deviate from your original plan. I put plan in quotes because I always plan out things, and if things don't go that way, then I start to panic. But it's okay if you stray from what you originally wanted to do, because in the end, it's your life. And yeah, so my next question for you is, how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role?
So, as we mentioned before, you need to be prepared for, and prepared to engage in lifelong learning. And it's something you should enjoy, because it really is interesting to keep yourself current and to learn new things. And it's incredibly critical because of the pace of change. You'll be obsolete if you don't. But it's also, as I said, it's interesting. I would always recommend that people, as much as possible, challenge themselves by moving into emerging areas. As I said, if you get comfortable in an area and stay there, you're going to get left behind. But it's also challenging and interesting to move into emerging areas, because that way you stay on top of the technology, you stay on top of the field, and you have more opportunities, because advancement is quicker in new areas.
Yeah. And last but not least, do you have any quotes or mottos that you love to follow and would like to share?
Well, frankly, in the last 3 years, there's that line of Kipling's, which I think is really important. If you can keep your head when all around you are losing theirs, I think that's an excellent quote, especially as we've seen in the last 3 years with COVID. Honestly, the number of people running around like chickens with their heads cut off has been quite interesting. So.
Well, thank you so much, Paulette, for being here today. Before we end off, do you have any last words for the audience?
No, I would just encourage everyone to really look into, because there are so many opportunities in STEM. it spans so many different fields, from engineering to biotech and medical, and environment is also has a lot of technical issues. So I would just say, don't close yourself off from it early. Get the background, explore, learn, and then you'll be able to choose a path that works for you.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Aruna. Good talking to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Arna Sahu, host of Arna's News, where on this podcast channel, I aim to eliminate the gender gap in the STEM fields by featuring inspiring female professionals and highlighting their stories and accomplishments to further encourage girls. Today on episode 35.
So, as we mentioned before, you need to be prepared for, prepared to engage in lifelong learning. And it's something you should enjoy, because it really is interesting to keep yourself current and to learn new things. And it's incredibly critical because of the pace of change. You'll be obsolete if you don't. But it's also, as I said, it's interesting. I would always recommend that people, as much as possible, challenge themselves by moving into emerging areas. As I said, if you get comfortable in an area and stay there, you're going to get left behind. But it's also challenging and interesting to move into emerging areas, because that way you stay on top of the technology, you stay on top of the field, and you have more opportunities, because advancement is quicker in new areas.